$45 million vanished from the global banking system in a matter of hours on February 19, 2013, and the thieves never fired a single bullet. They did not dynamite a heavy steel vault or scream at bank tellers to drop to the floor. Instead, one of the most perfectly executed heists in human history was carried out by young men in winter coats, casually walking up to outdoor ATMs holding heavy backpacks and discarded hotel room keys. This is the unlimited operation. This is the story that proves the golden era of the gentleman thief in a tailored suit is entirely dead. Today, the most dangerous people on earth do not carry shotguns. They carry laptops, magnetic stripe encoders, and a chilling understanding of how the global economy actually works. If you want to steal a few $1,000s, you walk into a local branch with a mask. If you want to steal $45 million in a single afternoon, you have to break the very concept of money. This is exactly how an international syndicate of hackers and street-level crooks turned the world's ATMs into their own personal slot machines, and how they almost got away with it. When you walk into a major financial institution, you see thick bulletproof glass. You see armed guards standing near the doors. You see a vault with steel walls a foot thick, protected by time locks and complex alarm systems. It all looks incredibly secure. But all of that heavy metal is just theater. The real wealth does not live inside a physical vault. Money is merely a string of ones and zeros bouncing through fiber optic cables, jumping from a server in New York to London, and eventually landing in a payment processing center thousands of miles away. The mastermind hackers behind this operation knew that attacking a major bank directly is a fool's errand. Major institutions employ military-grade cybersecurity. So, instead of kicking down the heavily armored front door, the hackers searched for a quiet, unlocked back window. They found exactly what they were looking for in India. Every time you swipe a debit card at the grocery store or feed it into an ATM, your bank rarely processes that transaction directly. They outsource that tedious labor to third-party payment processing companies. The hackers targeted two specific Indian processing firms, Endstage and Electrocard. These companies were not household names, but they held the keys to the kingdom. They handled transactions for prepaid debit cards issued by two Middle Eastern banks, Rak Bank in the United Arab Emirates, and the Bank of Muscat in Oman. Prepaid debit cards are the perfect vehicle for a heist. A standard debit card is tied directly to a personal checking account, anchored by a name, a home address, and a social security number. A prepaid card is entirely different. It only holds the specific funds loaded onto it, often issued to corporate employees for travel expenses. They are largely anonymous, and remarkably hard to trace. Sometime in late 2012, a highly sophisticated group of hackers slipped quietly past the digital firewalls of those Indian processing centers. They triggered no alarms. They just set up camp inside the servers and went to work. They had two highly specific goals. First, they stole the unencrypted account numbers and secret pins for a handful of prepaid debit cards. Second, and this is the true stroke of dark genius, they rewrote the rules governing those cards. Every debit card in the world is restricted by two limits: the actual balance of the account, and a daily withdrawal cap meant to protect you if the card is stolen. Sitting in a dark room somewhere in the world, the hackers accessed the administrative controls for the Bank of Muscat and Rak Bank accounts. With a few rapid keystrokes, they completely erased the withdrawal limits and zeroed out the balance caps. They took a cheap piece of plastic meant to hold a few $100s and magically transformed it into a bottomless well. A card that could withdraw an infinite amount of cash, limited only by the amount of paper currency a machine physically held. Holding a magic card is a beautiful thing, but it presents a highly practical problem. A hacker sitting behind a monitor in Eastern Europe cannot physically walk up to 10,000 ATMs in a single day to extract the cash. They needed boots on the ground. They needed an army of physical thieves, willing to do the heavy lifting. They turned to the dark web, the hidden, unindexed corners of the internet functioning like an underground Craigslist for organized crime. The masterminds reached out to trusted cashier cells, highly organized street-level criminal crews, located in 27 different countries. From the bustling neon streets of Tokyo, to the freezing avenues of Moscow, from the busy plazas of Columbia to the dense concrete grid of New York City, the crews were placed on high alert. The hackers electronically distributed the stolen limitless card data to the leaders of these street crews. Now, the street crews had the digital data, but they needed a way to feed that data into a physical ATM. This is where the grim humor of modern crime really shines. You do not need a highly sophisticated piece of plastic to trick a bank machine. An ATM only cares about one thing: the magnetic stripe on the back. The street crews went to work buying cheap, readily available magnetic stripe encoders online. Then, they gathered anything they could find featuring a magnetic stripe. They used expired credit cards. They used spent gift cards from local coffee shops. The New York cell even grabbed stacks of discarded hotel room keys. They ran these useless pieces of plastic through the encoders, rewriting the magnetic stripes with the stolen Bank of Muscat account data. To the naked eye, the thief was holding a bright green Holiday Inn room key. But to the electronic brain of an ATM, that piece of plastic was a premium, limitless debit card authorized by a major Middle Eastern bank. The weapons were loaded. The troops were in position. All they needed was the signal. Welcome to the Heist Vault. Behind every heist there's a story. Some end in prisons. Some end in graves. And some simply disappear. On February 19, 2013, the sun rose over a highly coordinated network of thieves waiting for a green light. They were scattered across 27 different countries, operating in dozens of different time zones. They did not know each other. They did not know the real names of the hackers who hired them. They only knew the plan, and they knew the payout was going to be enormous. When the signal finally came through from the mastermind hackers overseas, the world's financial network experienced a localized earthquake. The street crews mobilized. From Tokyo to Paris, from Moscow to Bogota, teams of cashers stepped out into the streets. They carried plain backpacks, wore heavy winter coats to hide their faces from security cameras, and held stacks of cloned hotel keys and gift cards. This was not a robbery where you break the glass and grab the bags of money. This was a robbery of repetition. To truly grasp the chaotic reality of this heist, we have to zoom in on the New York City cell. This crew was run by a 23-year-old man named Alberto Legibpena. He was not a sophisticated cyber hacker. He was an ambitious street-level operator based out of Yonkers, New York, who had managed to connect with the international syndicate. Legibpena gathered his crew, mostly a tight-knit group of friends in their 20s. He handed out the cloned cards and gave them very simple instructions: go to Manhattan, find an ATM, and do not stop withdrawing money until the machine is completely empty. Starting in the late afternoon, the New York crew hit the streets of Manhattan like a swarm of locusts. Picture the absurdity of the scene. A young guy stands at a bank machine on Broadway. He slides a blank piece of plastic into the reader. He types in the stolen PIN. He requests the maximum withdrawal amount, which is usually around $800 to $1,000 depending on the specific ATM. The machine whirs, clicks, and spits out a thick stack of $20 bills. Normally, if you tried to do that again, the bank's computer flags the transaction and denies it. But remember, the hackers in India had erased the limits. The computer system thought this card had infinite funds and zero restrictions. So, the thief takes the cash, shoves it into his backpack, and slides the exact same card right back into the machine. He punches the PIN again. He requests another $1,000. The machine happily complies. He does this 10 times, 20 times, 30 times. He stands there for 20 minutes, endlessly feeding the machine the same piece of plastic, while a line of frustrated New Yorkers forms behind him on the sidewalk, just wanting to pull out enough cash to buy a bagel or a taxi ride. The thief only stops when the ATM flashes a red error screen. The machine has not realized it is being robbed. It has simply run entirely out of paper money. Once the machine was drained dry, the crew member walked a few blocks down the street, found the next bank, and started the entire repetitive process over again. We often forget that money is a physical, tangible object. It takes up space. It has weight. $1 million in $20 bills weighs approximately 110 pounds. During this 10-hour window, the New York crew pulled out nearly $2.8 million. That means these young men in their 20s were literally hauling over 300 pounds of paper currency in backpacks up and down the avenues of Manhattan. Their fingers cramped from typing the same 4-digit pins hundreds of times. Their shoulders ached from the heavy canvas straps of their bags digging into their jackets. They had to take breaks, jumping into cabs to drop off heavy loads of cash at safe houses in the Bronx before heading right back out to the financial district to hit more machines. It was an exhausting, frantic 10-hour blue-collar labor job, funded by high-tech digital espionage. Over the course of that single afternoon and evening, the New York cell completed nearly 3,000 individual ATM withdrawals. But they were just one small piece of the puzzle. Worldwide, over that exact same 10-hour period, the global syndicate completed 36,000 transactions. By the time the sun came up the next day, the international crews had ripped $40 million out of the global banking system. The street-level thieves were exhausted, rich, and holding mountains of cash. But stealing paper currency is only the first phase of a successful robbery. The second phase is much harder. You have to wash it. The deal the street crews made with the hackers was simple. The physical thieves were allowed to keep a percentage of the cash they withdrew, usually around 20%, but the bulk of the millions had to be sent up the ladder to the masterminds in Eastern Europe. But you cannot just walk into a Western Union branch with $2 million in a duffel bag and wire it to a foreign country. That triggers immediate federal flags. You also cannot deposit your cut of the money into a personal checking account. The IRS tends to ask uncomfortable questions when a 20-something with no formal income suddenly deposits hundreds of thousands of dollars. The cash has to be laundered. It has to be transformed from dirty paper into clean hard assets. In New York, Legipena and his crew took their 20% cut and went on a shopping spree that rivaled a music video production. They walked straight out of the cold Manhattan streets and into the brightest, most expensive luxury boutiques in the city. They bought high-end Rolex watches, dropping tens of thousands of dollars at a time. They walked into luxury car dealerships and bought a sleek Mercedes SUV and a top-of-the-line Porsche Panamera. They paid for everything using thick rubber-banded stacks of $20 bills. This is where the flawless high-tech brilliance of the hackers crashed, headfirst into the foolish, arrogant reality of street-level criminals. The mastermind hackers left almost zero digital fingerprints. They operated in the shadows, carefully masking their IP addresses and communicating through encrypted channels. But the physical cashers? They wanted the world to know they had won. The New York crew members took photos of themselves sitting in the front seats of their newly purchased luxury cars, holding literal bricks of cash up to their faces, grinning from ear to ear. They snapped pictures of expensive watches wrapped around their wrists with bundles of money resting on their laps. They acted invincible. They forgot one very important detail. Every single ATM they had drained over that 10-hour period was equipped with a high-definition security camera. The banks had crystal-clear footage of their faces, their coats, and their heavy backpacks. The federal authorities were already compiling the tapes, tracking the movements, and building the profile. The clock was ticking, and the New York cell had no idea that their shopping spree was leaving a trail of breadcrumbs leading federal agents straight to their front doors. You can steal $45 million using a laptop and a hotel key, but you cannot outrun a paper trail. While the New York street crew was busy popping champagne bottles, posing for photos, and buying luxury sports cars in cash, a very different kind of meeting was taking place in corporate boardrooms and federal offices. Because, when the sun finally came up the morning after the 10-hour looting spree, the global financial system began its daily routine of reconciling the ledgers. That is when the alarm bells started ringing. The executives at the Bank of Muscat and Rackbank looked at their computer screens and realized something impossible had happened. Millions of dollars had vanished overnight, entirely pulled from a handful of prepaid debit card accounts that were only supposed to hold a few $1,000s total. The banks immediately contacted law enforcement. In the United States, the Secret Service, the agency originally created specifically to protect the nation's financial infrastructure, took the lead. The federal investigators did not have to search the streets for fingerprints or interview eyewitnesses. They just looked at the digital logs. An ATM is a highly communicative machine. Every time a card is inserted, the machine records the exact time, the location, the amount requested, and the card number used. The Secret Service agents looked at the data from New York City and found a beautiful, perfectly mapped-out trail of breadcrumbs. They saw thousands of withdrawals happening back-to-back, hitting maximum limits over and over again. They mapped out the exact route the thieves took, tracing their path block by block as they walked down the avenues of Manhattan. Once they had the locations and the timestamps, the agents simply went to the banks and asked for the surveillance footage. The thieves had tried to be clever. They wore heavy winter coats, pulled thick hats down low over their eyebrows, and wrapped scarves around their faces to hide from the lenses. But investigators are patient people. They gathered hundreds of hours of video from ATMs, street corners, and local businesses. They started noticing patterns. They tracked the identical heavy backpacks. They identified the same distinct winter jackets. They watched the thieves jump into specific taxis and followed the route of those cars using city traffic cameras. The feds cross-referenced this physical tracking with the sudden highly suspicious luxury purchases happening around Yonkers. You simply cannot walk into a high-end dealership, hand a salesman a duffel bag full of rubber-banded $20 bills for a Porsche Panamera, and expect the federal government to look the other way. Dealerships are legally required to report large cash transactions. The authorities closed the net. They matched the faces from the dealership cameras to the heavily bundled figures standing in front of the ATMs. They raided the Yonkers safe houses, arresting 7 members of the crew. They confiscated hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash, a collection of expensive Rolex watches, and the physical magnetic stripe encoders used to make the cloned cards. The street-level crew was headed to federal prison. But the head of the New York cell, Alberto UC Legidpena, had seen the writing on the wall. Legidpena knew the feds were coming. He packed a suitcase with approximately $100,000 of his remaining cut, grabbed a flight, and fled to the Dominican Republic. He thought he had won. He had successfully escaped the United States with a fortune, evading the Secret Service and the FBI. He probably believed he was going to live out the rest of his days on a tropical beach, enjoying the fruits of a brilliant non-violent cyber heist. But the criminal underworld is a ruthless, unforgiving ecosystem. You cannot hide a suitcase full of money in the criminal underground for very long. Word spreads quickly. People talk. In late April 2013, just 2 months after the historic heist, a group of local armed robbers kicked down the door of the house where Legidpena was hiding in the Dominican Republic. This was not a highly coordinated, high-tech operation. It was a brutal old-school home invasion. The attackers wanted the cash. In the ensuing chaos, Legidpena was shot and killed. The robbers tore the house apart, grabbed the suitcase full of stolen money, and vanished into the night. The man who helped orchestrate the most sophisticated nonviolent bank robbery in American history met a violent, bloody end over a fraction of the loot. You might think the story neatly wraps up with a suitcase full of cash in the Dominican Republic and a few guys from Yonkers sitting in a jail cell. But when dealing with a $45 million global syndicate, the rabbit hole always goes much deeper. We have heavily focused on the chaotic 10 hours in New York City, where a group of young guys walked away with $2.8 million. But what about the other $42 million? To fully grasp the unprecedented scale of the 2013 Unlimited operation, we have to look past the streets of Manhattan. We have to look at the masterminds, the beta test, and the chilling way hackers manage an army of thieves they have never actually met. No brilliant hacker writes a piece of malware, breaches an international financial system, and instantly goes for the jackpot on the very first try. If you are going to break the global economy, you do a test run first. The famous February 19th heist that drained the Bank of Muscat was actually the second wave of the attack. The first wave happened 2 months earlier, in December 2012. The target for the test run was Rackbank, located in the United Arab Emirates. The hackers used the exact same method. They infiltrated the Indian processing center, found the prepaid debit card files, and erased the withdrawal limits on a very small specific batch of cards. They reached out to their dark web network and activated a smaller selection of street crews. The instructions were identical: clone the magnetic stripes, hit the ATMs, and take everything. The December test run was remarkably successful, though much smaller in scope. Over a few days, the international street crews completed roughly 4,500 ATM transactions. They walked away with $5 million. For the street crews, $5 million was a life-changing fortune. For the hackers, it was merely proof of concept. The test run proved that the global banking infrastructure was asleep at the wheel. The processing centers did not catch the breach. The ATMs dispensed the cash exactly as programmed. The street crews successfully laundered their cuts and sent the bulk of the profits up the chain of command. The software worked. The hardware worked. The human element worked. The hackers spent January refining their malware, preparing for the main event. Here is a fascinating problem that every criminal mastermind eventually has to solve. How do you trust the people working for you? If you are a cybercriminal sitting behind an encrypted computer screen in Eastern Europe, and you give a street-level thug in New York City the power to withdraw infinite amounts of cash, what stops that thug from taking the money and simply disappearing? What stops Legidpena from keeping all $2.8 million for himself and laughing at your threatening emails? You cannot exactly call the police and report that your stolen money was stolen from you. You cannot sue them in a court of law. The hackers solved this problem with pure, unadulterated surveillance. The masterminds did not just hack the administrative controls of the prepaid cards to erase the limits. They also hacked the administrative monitoring software. While the street crews were running up and down Broadway, shoving $20 bills into backpacks, the hackers were sitting in their dark rooms, watching the global ATM ledger update in real time. They watched every single transaction across all 27 countries. They knew exactly which cloned card was being used, at which specific bank machine, at the exact second the money was dispensed. If the New York crew withdrew $2.8 million, the hackers knew it down to the very last cent. If a street boss tried to send only $1 million up the ladder and claimed the machines ran dry early, the hackers could pull the digital logs, prove he was lying, and permanently cut him out of the network, or worse, send a violent local associate to collect the debt. It was a brilliantly terrifying, it was a brilliantly efficient system of checks and balances, built entirely by thieves to keep other thieves honest. While New York was busy draining machines, identical scenes were playing out simultaneously across the globe. In major financial hubs like Tokyo, London, and Paris, other cells were executing the exact same repetitive labor. The syndicate purposely chose 27 different countries to spread out the damage. If $40 million suddenly vanished from a single city in an afternoon, local authorities would lock down the grid immediately. By spreading the withdrawals across thousands of machines in dozens of countries, the hackers created an ingenious smoke screen. To the local bank branches in Romania or Japan, it just looked like a slightly busier than usual Tuesday. It was a beautifully choreographed flash mob of theft. The sun would rise in Tokyo, and the local crew would start draining the machines. As night fell over Asia and the ATMs ran empty, the sun rose over Europe, and a brand new set of crews picked up the baton. The wave of withdrawals moved perfectly across the time zones, following the daylight, and ending its grand finale on the east coast of the United States. The hackers had solved the digital problems. They had solved the logistical issues. They even solved the trust problem. But they could not solve the fundamental flaw of human ego. We talked about how the Yonkers crew went on an absurd shopping spree, buying Rolexes and a Porsche Panamera. But their careless behavior went far beyond luxury cars. In the days following the heist, the New York cell became wildly arrogant. They were young, suddenly richer than they had ever dreamed possible, and they felt invincible. The physical cash was burning a hole in their pockets. Investigators later discovered that members of the crew were literally packing heavy stacks of $20 bills into everyday shoeboxes and storing them in their closets. They were taking thick wads of cash to underground gambling rings and throwing money around like it was worthless paper. One of the crew members, a 24-year-old named Elvis Rafael Rodriguez, actually uploaded a video to YouTube. He did not confess to the crime on camera, but the video showed him and his friends driving around New York in their brand new, cash-bought luxury vehicles, flaunting their sudden inexplicable wealth to the entire internet. When federal investigators are building a case, they love nothing more than a suspect who volunteers to do the bragging for them. The Secret Service agents simply matched the timeline of the sudden wealth to the timeline of the ATM withdrawals. The YouTube video became a golden piece of circumstantial evidence. The masterminds had built an airtight, mathematically perfect operation. But a chain is only as strong as its weakest link, and the weakest link is always the guy who buys a Porsche and brags about it on the internet. The New York cell captured the headlines because they were loud, arrogant, and operating right in Wall Street's backyard. But remember, this was a synchronized strike across 27 different countries. While the American media focused on the kids from Yonkers, a massive silent dragnet was snapping shut around the globe. Working in tandem with the Secret Service, agencies like Europol and Interpol began kicking down doors from London to Bogota. In Romania, police raided underground electronics exporters who were washing the stolen cash. In Britain and Japan, authorities quietly rolled up the regional managers, the high-ranking lieutenants who acted as the vital middlemen between the mastermind hackers and the street thieves. But catching an entire global flash mob is a logistical impossibility. The Yonkers crew was caught because they acted like lottery winners. But in jurisdictions with less cooperative law enforcement, or in cells where the street bosses were highly disciplined, the outcome was very different. The smarter crews kept their heads down. They watched their cut of the money quietly through underground shadow economies, burned their magnetic stripe encoders, and simply vanished into the crowd. They walked away rich, perfectly willing to let their louder, foolish counterparts in New York take the fall. Putting a few young adults behind bars was a victory, but the federal agents knew it didn't solve the actual problem. The street cashers were entirely disposable. To stop this from ever happening again, they had to cut the head off the snake. They had to find the puppet master. Tracing a highly skilled cybercriminal through the dark web is like trying to find a specific grain of sand in a hurricane. Hackers of this caliber do not use their real names. They bounce their internet connections through dozens of encrypted servers across multiple continents, intentionally laying false trails to confuse investigators. The mastermind behind the unlimited operation went by an online alias, Predator. The Secret Service's Cyber Intelligence Division spent months meticulously untangling the digital knots Predator had left behind. They analyzed the malware used to breach the Indian processing centers. They tracked the encrypted communications used to organize the cashier cells. Slowly, piece by agonizing piece, they built a profile of the man sitting behind the keyboard. They eventually identified him. His real name was Erkan Findikoglu. He was a highly intelligent, top-tier Turkish hacker. Identifying him was a triumph, but arresting him was a completely different legal puzzle. Findikoglu was living comfortably in Turkey, a country that does not readily extradite its citizens to the United States for financial cybercrimes. Findikoglu knew this. He believed he was completely untouchable, shielded by international borders and complex extradition treaties. He was brilliant at writing code, but just like the Yonkers crew, he possessed a fatal flaw. He got overly confident. In December 2013, 10 months after pulling off the greatest digital bank robbery in history, Findikoglu decided he needed a vacation. He booked a flight out of Turkey and traveled to Frankfurt, Germany. He severely underestimated the reach of the American government. The United States and Germany share a very strong, highly cooperative extradition treaty. The moment Findikoglu's passport was scanned at the Frankfurt airport, red flags lit up across international databases. Before he could even enjoy a German beer, local authorities swept in and arrested him right at the airport on behalf of the U.S. Secret Service. After spending 18 months fighting his extradition through the German legal system, the mastermind was placed on a flight to New York. Facing a mountain of undeniable digital evidence, he pleaded guilty and was handed an 8-year federal prison sentence. The man who rewrote the rules of the global economy traded his keyboard for a standard-issue prison uniform. While the lawyers were battling in courtrooms, the banking industry was frantically trying to ensure a disaster of this scale could never be repeated. The unlimited operation succeeded because of one glaring weakness: the magnetic stripe. A magnetic stripe on the back of a credit or debit card is essentially a piece of 1970s technology. It works exactly like an old cassette tape. The account information is recorded onto the stripe, and it never changes. Because the data is static, it is incredibly easy for a criminal to copy that data and paste it onto a blank card or a hotel room key. The ATM reads the tape and assumes it is the real thing. Watching hackers drain $45 million using old hotel keys was the ultimate wake-up call. The banking industry accelerated a nationwide shift away from the magnetic stripe and toward the EMV chip, the small metallic square you now see on the front of all your cards. A chip is not a static cassette tape. It is a tiny, highly advanced computer. Every single time you insert a chip card into a machine, the chip generates a unique, one-time transaction code. Even if a hacker manages to steal that specific code, it is completely useless for a second transaction. You cannot copy a computer chip onto a blank piece of plastic with a cheap encoder you bought online. The industry also completely revamped its velocity checks. Think of a velocity check like a bartender at a bar. If you walk in and order a shot of vodka, the bartender would pour you one. If you try to order 30 shots in a 10-minute window, the bartender is going to stop serving you. Before the 2013 heist, the velocity checks on prepaid debit cards were incredibly weak. Following the heist, banks implemented highly aggressive behavioral algorithms. Today, the system looks at the speed and location of your transactions. If a card is used in New York, and then 30 minutes later the exact same account number attempts a transaction in Tokyo, the system immediately locks the account, recognizing that a human being cannot fly across the globe in half an hour. Whenever you hear a story about federal agents kicking down doors and bringing cybercriminals to justice, it is incredibly easy to feel a sense of closure. The bad guys went to prison. The loophole was closed. The system worked. But if you look closely at the final ledger of the 2013 unlimited operation, that feeling of closure completely evaporates. Out of the $45 million that was violently ripped out of the global economy over a few short hours, the authorities only recovered a fraction. They seized a few luxury cars, auctioned off some Rolex watches, and confiscated the cash stuffed into shoeboxes in Yonkers. But what about the other $40 million? It vanished into the shadowy, unregulated corners of the global economy. It was washed through foreign electronics exports, traded through underground hawala brokers, and converted into untraceable cryptocurrency. The street cashers operating in countries with less cooperative law enforcement simply walked away rich. That missing $40 million represents the true lingering legacy of this heist. It funded the next generation of cybercrime. The 2013 ATM cash-out was a highly unique pivot point in the history of human theft. It was the spectacular chaotic finale of the duffel bag era, a brilliant digital lockpick that still ultimately required human beings to carry hundreds of pounds of dirty paper currency down a freezing city street. The smartest thieves looked at the operation and learned a vital lesson. Dealing with physical cash is an unnecessary liability, and human beings are the weakest point of any network. Today, the digital arms race has completely bypassed the ATM on the corner of your street. The syndicates took their unrecovered millions and invested in entirely new methods of theft. Instead of cloning prepaid debit cards, they deploy ransomware to lock down hospital networks and city governments. They target decentralized cryptocurrency exchanges, quietly siphoning hundreds of millions of dollars in purely digital assets without a single person ever having to put on a winter coat. The bank robber of the 21st century does not want paper currency. Paper burns. Paper takes up space. Paper requires a money launderer. Digital currency is light, fast, and borderless. The hackers broke the rules of money. They turned plastic into gold and transformed ordinary ATMs into broken slot machines that paid out the jackpot every single time. They exposed the chilling truth about our highly connected society. We have built a world where you can send money across the globe in a fraction of a second, but that same convenience allows a thief to empty your pockets from 1,000 miles away before you even know you have been robbed. The bank robbers did not disappear. They just evolved. The getaway cars were traded in for encrypted routers, and the ski masks were swapped for lines of malicious code. The heist never stopped. It just moved to a place where we can no longer see it happening. This is the Heist Vault. Subscribe for more true heists and robberies.